What kind of a person was King Abdulaziz?
Huh?
What kind of a man was King Abdulaziz?
He was one of the most outstanding men I have known. I mean, the story of his life and how he regained the lost kingdom of his ancestors is well known, and I have discussed it in this book, The Road to Mecca. But his personality was absolutely outstanding. He was very tall, perhaps 7'4" or 7'5". I don't know exactly the exact figure, but he was very tall. I was taller at that time than I am now because my back was straight. And when I greeted him and in the Arab way kissed him on the tip of his nose and his forehead, I had to stand on my toes while he bent down to me. And he was not only a great person, but a great ruler. He established a kingdom which had never existed before, a kingdom in which there was and is to this day absolute public security, nowhere else to be found in the world. And it was a kingdom, in spite of not having a written constitution, a kingdom that survived many shocks. When Abdulaziz died, his eldest son Saud became king, and afterwards he was deposed and died. Then King Faisal, the younger son, became king, and he was murdered. And then after him, his younger brother Khalid became king, and so forth to the present time. And all these shocks did not change anything in the structure of the political structure of the country and left it undisturbed. No other country in the world, I think, could have survived such deaths and occurrences without getting out of kilter entirely.
What kind of a Muslim was he?
Ibn Saud? He was a very strict Muslim of the so-called Wahhabi persuasion, which is a misnomer, of course, because it goes back to a scholar of the 18th century, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, who was a very orthodox scholar following the school of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. But I mean, Ibn Saud was a very orthodox, strict Muslim, and at the same time he had a very definite sense of humor, which made his behavior not only acceptable but delightful. I remember one day we went out in cars into the desert in Riyadh, and something happened to the engine of the car in which we were traveling. We had to stop, and the driver, who was a Baluchi, many years Ibn Saud's driver, he bent down to look into the engine. And while he bent down, a packet of cigarettes fell from his pocket on the ground. And you must know that in this Wahhabi, so-called Wahhabi persuasion, tobacco is absolutely prohibited. So the men became flustered. The king saw it, and this driver obviously expected an outburst from the king, who was standing next to him. But the king looked at this and then turned away and said, Muhammad Asad, look at those mountains there. You see, this mountain goes like this and that. Change the subject. And the man picked up his cigarettes and hid them in his pocket. And I saw that Ibn Saud had a sense of humor which outweighed his severity and his seriousness very often. And there were many such instances which I experienced. As I said, I spent 6 years with him, not always in his presence, but off and on between my travels in Arabia, and very much. So I think it was one of the best periods of my life.